Catherine firmly held the white envelope in her trembling hands, feeling the weight of those words she had just heard in the doctor's office echoing in her mind like a funeral bell. At 65, she had always considered herself a strong woman, with well-kept grey hair and brown eyes that still shone with the vivacity of someone who had faced many battles in life. Her skin, marked by time but still soft, reflected years of care and dedication to family, while her hands, small but firm, trembled slightly as she held that document that would change everything. The diagnosis was clear and relentless: terminal cancer, with just 1 month to live. Each word from the doctor had hit her heart like a devastating blow, but now she needed to find strength to tell Edward, her husband of 40 years of marriage. "Edward, I need to talk to you about something very important," said Catherine, her voice coming out weaker than she would like. "My love, you look pale." "What happened at the doctor today?" Edward responded with apparent concern. Edward looked up from the newspaper he was reading in the brown leather armchair in the living room, that sacred place where he used to spend his afternoons since retiring 3 years earlier from a bureaucratic job that never brought him true satisfaction, but which guaranteed a comfortable retirement. He was a 62-year-old man, hair still abundant but completely white as winter snow, elegant and imposing bearing that he religiously maintained even at home, always wearing his well-pressed and starched fine fabric dress shirts and tailored pants that cost more than many people earned in a month. His light blue eyes, which once were the irresistible charm that won Catherine while still young at a family party, now seemed more calculating and cold, observing her every movement with a predatory attention that she naively interpreted as affection and marital concern, but which in reality hid something much darker and self-interested. His hands, large and well-groomed with nails trimmed weekly by a professional manicurist, held the economic newspaper with firmness and familiarity, but Catherine noticed how his fingers contracted slightly when she mentioned the medical consultation, as if he already knew what was coming. The expression on his face changed subtly, like a mask being adjusted, a calculated mixture of apparent concern and something she couldn't fully identify, but which made her stomach contract inexplicably. The way he carefully folded the newspaper and placed it on the side table, keeping the pages perfectly aligned, revealed a mental organization that contrasted with the supposed spontaneity of his reaction to her presence. "The tests. The results weren't good, Edward," Catherine began, her voice breaking slightly as she approached the armchair where he was sitting. "The doctor said I have cancer, a very aggressive type. He gave me only a month to live." "No, Catherine, this can't be true," exclaimed Edward, dropping the newspaper on the floor and quickly standing up to embrace her. The impact of the devastating words seemed to hit Edward like lightning in an open sky, and Catherine watched fascinated and at the same time disturbed as his face contorted into a theatrical expression of shock and despair that seemed studied and rehearsed, as if he had practiced that reaction in front of the mirror several times before. He wrapped her in his strong, muscular arms, the result of years of gym and body care, pressing her against his broad chest as she felt the salty tears begin to flow uncontrollably down her cheeks, already marked by the wrinkles of age and accumulated worries. The familiar scent of his imported aftershave, that expensive and distinctive aroma that she had intimately known for decades and that always made her feel safe, brought momentary and nostalgic comfort amid that devastating emotional storm that had descended upon their lives like an unexpected hurricane. Edward caressed her grey hair with an exaggerated delicacy that did not match the urgency of the situation, murmuring words of consolation in her ear as she allowed herself to cry copiously in his arms, letting all the anguish and terror pour out through her bitter tears. For a fleeting moment, Catherine felt that perhaps she could face that final and desperate battle with the unconditional love and unwavering support of the man she had chosen to share her life with, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. But there was something disturbing in his eyes, a calculating coldness behind the mask of compassion that she couldn't fully comprehend, something that made her feel an inexplicable shiver run down her spine, like icy fingers walking across her skin. "Darling, I cannot lose you," said Edward, moving slightly away to look into her eyes while holding her face between his hands. "We'll fight this together, do you hear? We'll do everything possible." "Edward, I'm so afraid. I don't know how I'll get through this," Catherine murmured through tears. The following hours dragged on like a confusing and suffocating blur of whispered phone calls to distant relatives she rarely saw. Fragmented conversations filled with awkward silences and a devastating emotional weight that hung over the entire house like a black storm cloud about to burst. Edward seemed apparently tireless in his exaggerated and almost performative dedication, preparing lukewarm chamomile tea for Catherine with his firm and precise hands, carefully adjusting the floral cushions on the sofa so she would be more comfortable, and even cancelling important social commitments he had scheduled for the coming days, calling each person with a voice heavy with rehearsed drama. His attention was constant and apparently touching, but Catherine began to notice small disturbing details that deeply troubled her. The calculated way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, as if evaluating a valuable commodity. The mysterious calls he made to the office, always speaking in a low voice and leaving the room for privacy, and especially the suspicious quickness with which he seemed to have accepted and processed the devastating news of her impending death. While she still desperately struggled to process the cruel reality of her terminal condition, feeling lost in a labyrinth of contradictory emotions, Edward already seemed to be mentally organizing the next steps with disturbing businesslike efficiency, as if following a detailed script that he had carefully elaborated and revised long before that fateful moment. The discrepancy between the grief she felt and the practical organization he demonstrated began to create an uncomfortable feeling in her chest, as if some important piece of the puzzle was out of place. "Catherine, my love, I know this is a very difficult time for you," said Edward, sitting beside her on the sofa and holding her hands with apparent affection. "But we need to take care of some practical matters to ensure you receive the best possible treatment." "Practical matters? Edward, I can barely think straight right now," Catherine responded with confusion. Edward disappeared for a long 15 minutes into his private office, that small sacred room at the back of the house where he kept all his personal documents organized in colored folders, and where Catherine rarely entered out of respect for his privacy, but also because he always subtly discouraged her presence in that masculine space. When he finally returned to the living room, he brought with him a genuine black leather folder, clearly expensive and well-maintained, and a tense facial expression, attempting to disguise a growing and palpable anxiety that made his eyes shine in a strange way. He approached her again with measured and calculated steps, placing the heavy folder on the tempered glass coffee table with a dry sound that echoed through the silent room, and opening it with precise and rehearsed movements that revealed a suspicious familiarity with that ritual. Catherine observed with growing discomfort how his long fingers moved with confidence and dexterity among the carefully organized papers, as if he knew exactly where to find each document he was looking for without even needing to look properly, like someone who had rehearsed that moment many times in his mind. The meticulous way he organized the documents on the table, aligning them with millimetric perfection and separating them into small piles organized by category, revealed a level of prior preparation and planning that seemed totally incompatible with the genuine surprise he should have felt at the sudden news of her terminal illness. Something in his methodical, almost robotic behavior and in his businesslike posture contrasted dramatically with the devastating emotional situation they were supposedly going through together as a couple united by tragedy. "Look, darling, I brought some documents that the health insurance and the hospital will need you to sign," explained Edward, his voice assuming a more practical and direct tone. "They're just necessary bureaucracies to ensure you have access to all available treatments without delays or complications. But Edward, I can barely concentrate right now." "I can't sign important documents without even reading them," Catherine protested hesitantly. Catherine looked with growing apprehension at the papers methodically spread out on the glass table, desperately trying to focus her vision, blurred by persistent tears, on the small intricate characters and endless lines of incomprehensible legal text that seemed to dance before her tired eyes. Her head was still violently spinning with the devastating news she had received a few hours earlier, as if the entire world had been turned upside down in a matter of seconds, and the idea of having to deal with complicated bureaucratic paperwork at that moment of extreme emotional vulnerability seemed not only inadequate, but almost cruel and inhumane. Edward, immediately noticing her natural and understandable hesitation, moved even closer physically, subtly but insistently invading her personal space, placing a muscular arm around her fragile shoulders in a gesture that should theoretically be comforting and protective, but which somehow inexplicably made her feel pressured and cornered, like a trapped animal. He pointed with his index finger to different specific sections of the densely written documents, quickly and superficially explaining what each paper was about, but his technical and legally complex words seemed to mix and become confused in her disturbed and emotionally overwhelmed mind, as if he were speaking in a foreign language she couldn't understand. Catherine noticed with a sharp feminine instinct how he systematically avoided making direct and honest eye contact while talking about the papers, obsessively focusing on the documents as if he were reading a theatrical script that he had carefully memorized and rehearsed several times before that crucial moment. "Love, I understand that you're shaken, but that's exactly why I'm here to take care of everything," insisted Edward, taking a golden pen from his briefcase and gently placing it in Catherine's hand. "You don't need to worry about reading every detail now. Trust me, they're just standard formalities that all patients in your situation need to sign." But what if I'm signing something I don't understand?" "Edward, this makes me very uncomfortable," muttered Catherine with growing anxiety. Edward maintained subtle but persistent and relentless psychological pressure, tirelessly repeating several times how those documents were simply necessary bureaucracies without any real importance, and how she was understandably too emotionally shaken to worry about administrative paperwork without greater meaning. His words flowed eloquently and apparently convincingly, carrying a superficial affection that sounded almost melodious, but there was something deeply disturbing in his tone of voice that didn't completely match the tragic and devastating situation they were theoretically facing as a couple united by love and adversity. Catherine felt a strange and inexplicable sensation of déjà vu run through her entire body like an electric current, as if she had already lived exactly that distressing moment before in a recurring dream or nightmare, but she couldn't precisely identify why that situation seemed so familiar and at the same time so threatening to her. She observed more attentively and analytically Edward's face as he continued to explain with growing insistence the crucial importance of signing the documents quickly, without unnecessary delays, and began to notice small revealing signs of tension that he desperately tried to hide. The unconscious way he slightly bit his lower lip when he thought she wasn't paying attention, how his blue eyes moved nervously and erratically between her and the papers, as if he were mentally calculating each movement, and especially how his large hands visibly sweated despite the pleasantly cool temperature of the well-air-conditioned room. These small, seemingly insignificant details slowly began to form a recognizable and disturbing pattern in her intuitive mind, a dark pattern that made her increasingly uncomfortable and suspicious, as if she were being manipulated by someone who intimately knew her emotional weaknesses. "Please, Catherine, do this for me," said Edward, his voice taking on a slightly more urgent tone as he guided her hand toward the documents. "I promise I'll take care of everything for you. I just need you to trust me as you always have throughout all these years." "Edward, something isn't right. Why such a hurry with these papers?" questioned Catherine with growing suspicion. Catherine firmly held the heavy golden pen that Edward had strategically placed in her trembling hand, feeling the cold and substantial weight of the noble metal against her fragile fingers that shook uncontrollably from the devastating combination of fear of imminent death and a growing inexplicable distrust that was beginning to form in her broken heart. For an endless and agonizing moment, she almost completely yielded to the gentle but relentlessly persistent pressure from her husband, almost placed the silver tip of the elegant pen on the official paper and blindly signed without questioning a single word, exactly as he had suggested, with such seemingly affectionate insistence. After all, it had been exactly 40 years of marriage, 4 entire decades of seemingly unshakable mutual trust and unconditional support through storms and calm waters, shared joys and divided sorrows, a love story that had begun when both were young and full of dreams about the future. But at the exact crucial moment, when the metal tip of the pen delicately touched the smooth surface of the paper, something deep and primitive in her ancestral feminine instinct imperiously warned her to stop immediately, as if a powerful and wise inner voice urgently whispered in her ear with the authority of generations of women who had preceded her. It was as if all the mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers of her lineage were whispering advice of prudence through the centuries, a powerful and infallible intuition that had guided and protected her through difficult moments and crucial decisions throughout her entire life. Without Edward noticing her subtle change in strategy, she carefully began to make fluid and apparently legitimate movements with the pen that looked visually identical to real signatures, but which in reality were just elaborate and artistically executed scribbles, completely without legal or documentary value. Her brown eyes remained carefully fixed on the paper, as if she were concentrating on the task of signing, but her mind was completely alert and functioning at maximum speed, meticulously recording and analyzing each micro-reaction of Edward as he watched with satisfaction, naively believing that she was signing all the documents exactly as he had requested with such suspicious urgency. 3 days after the disturbing episode with the documents, Catherine woke up with an iron determination burning in her chest, like a fire that does not easily extinguish. During the previous nights, she had spent hours awake, lying beside Edward, who slept deeply, analyzing every suspicious detail of that terrible moment when he had tried to make her sign papers without reading. Her feminine intuition, sharpened by decades of life experience, incessantly screamed that something was deeply wrong in that whole situation, as if pieces of a dark puzzle slowly began to fit together in her perceptive mind. The way he had organized the documents with such precision, the subtle but relentless pressure for her to sign quickly, and especially that strange gleam in his eyes that she had noticed but couldn't fully interpret at the time. She decided that she needed to discover the truth on her own, starting with the medical diagnosis that had completely changed the course of her life. While Edward took his morning shower humming carelessly, she discreetly picked up the phone and scheduled an urgent appointment with another doctor, a renowned specialist that a friend had recommended years before during a casual conversation about health. "I need a second medical opinion as soon as possible, please. It's truly a matter of life or death, doctor," said Catherine on the phone, her voice trembling slightly from the growing anxiety she felt. "Dr. Helen can see you today at 3 o'clock sharp. Bring all your previous tests for a complete analysis," replied the receptionist with professional efficiency. The office of Dr. Helen was on the other side of town, in a modern and well-equipped medical building that Catherine had never visited before, with well-maintained gardens at the entrance and an atmosphere of professional seriousness that immediately inspired confidence. Throughout the taxi ride, she felt her heart beating rapidly like a deafening drum, oscillating between desperate hope that there was an error in the previous diagnosis and the paralyzing fear that her condition was truly terminal, as she had been informed by the first doctor. She carried with her all the previous exams, meticulously organized in a blue folder that she had bought especially for this occasion, including the images of the scans, detailed laboratory results, and even the notes that the first doctor had made during the initial consultation. Dr. Helen was a woman of approximately 50 years, brown hair tied in an elegant and professional bun, gold-framed glasses that gave her an intellectual air, and a warm smile that immediately conveyed confidence, competence, and genuine humanity. She meticulously examined each document, each image, each test result, with the thorough attention of a detective investigating a complex crime, making precise notes in her chart and asking detailed questions about the specific symptoms that Catherine had experienced in recent weeks. "Mrs. Catherine, I want you to know that I will analyze everything very carefully before giving any definitive opinion on your specific case," said Dr. Helen, putting on her glasses and assuming a concentrated posture. "Doctor, please tell me the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. I need to know exactly what is happening to me," responded Catherine, firmly holding her trembling hands. After 2 hours of thorough examination, complete review of all medical documents, and a new battery of quick tests that Dr. Helen considered necessary to confirm her initial suspicions, the revelation came like a bolt from the blue, making Catherine's entire world spin at a dizzying speed. The specialist explained with crystal clarity that there was absolutely no sign of cancer in her body, no malignant cells, no tumors, no metastases, nor any other condition that could be remotely considered terminal or even concerning from an oncological perspective. The exams showed only a benign inflammation that was completely treatable with simple anti-inflammatory medications, basic changes in diet, and some lifestyle adjustments, something that millions of people routinely face without any significant risk to their health or longevity. Catherine felt a turbulent and overwhelming mixture of immense relief for being perfectly healthy and growing anger for having been deceived in such a cruel, calculated, and deliberate manner by someone she completely trusted. During the entire way back home, sitting in the back seat of the taxi while watching the city pass by the window, her mind worked at maximum speed, connecting dots that previously seemed disconnected and reaching conclusions that made her increasingly furious, determined, and decided to discover the whole truth about this absurd situation. "Doctor, Helen, how is it possible that two doctors arrive at such completely different diagnoses for the same person? This doesn't make the slightest sense," questioned Catherine, still trying to process the information. "Unfortunately, medical errors happen, Mrs. Catherine, but the important thing is that we now know that you are perfectly healthy and have many years of life ahead of you," responded the doctor with a reassuring smile. Back at her house, Catherine feigned absolute naturalness when Edward asked about her outing, simply saying that she had gone to do some necessary shopping and resolve minor issues related to the treatment she supposedly needed to start. She carefully observed each of his reactions, each micro-expression, each chosen word, looking for signs that confirmed her growing suspicions about the true intentions behind that pressure to sign documents without reading them. Edward seemed too relaxed, almost too relieved, as if he were anxiously waiting for her to make a specific decision about those mysterious papers that he had presented with such urgency a few days earlier. During dinner, he made subtle comments about the importance of putting paperwork in order and not leaving bureaucratic issues pending in difficult times like this, always with that caring and concerned tone of voice that now sounded completely false to Catherine's sharpened ears. She decided that she needed to act quickly and with strategic intelligence, starting by discovering exactly what those documents contained that Edward had tried to make her sign during her moment of greatest emotional vulnerability. That same night, while Edward slept deeply, she silently removed the papers from where he had stored them, carefully copying them before returning them to their original place to avoid raising premature suspicions. "Edward, dear, you're right about organizing the paperwork. Tomorrow I'll go out to do some shopping and take care of personal matters," said Catherine, purposely keeping the information vague. "That's good, my love. Take some time to rest as well. You need to take care of your health during this delicate moment," Edward replied, and Catherine noticed a strange gleam in his eyes. The next morning, Catherine woke up early and went directly to Michael's office. Her trusted lawyer for more than 15 years, a man of integrity, competence, and discretion, who had always handled the family's legal matters with exemplary dedication and impeccable professionalism. Michael was a distinguished 60-year-old gentleman with well-trimmed grey hair that gave him an air of respectable authority, reading glasses always hanging around his neck on an elegant golden chain, and an absolutely impeccable reputation in the local legal community that made him a reference in family and succession law matters. His office was located in an elegant and traditional commercial building in the historic center of the city, decorated with noble Brazilian wood furniture, shelves filled with updated legal codes, and framed diplomas demonstrating his solid experience and deep knowledge of legal complexities. When Catherine arrived without prior notice, nervously holding a discreet folder with the copies of documents she had made during the early hours, Michael immediately perceived by the tense and worried expression on her face that something very serious and delicate was happening in her personal life. She explained the disturbing situation in detail, from the false diagnosis of terminal cancer to the psychological pressure Edward had exerted to make her sign the papers without any opportunity for reading or analysis, observing how Michael's professional expression became increasingly grave, concerned, and frankly indignant as she related the specific and disturbing details of that traumatic and manipulative experience. "Michael, I need you to examine these documents very carefully and tell me exactly what they're about. I have a terrible feeling about Edward's true intentions," said Catherine, handing over the folder with visibly trembling hands. "Catherine, you can relax. I will analyze every comma in these papers and discover precisely what your husband was trying to do to you, responded Michael, putting on his glasses and immediately assuming a serious and concentrated professional posture. The heavy and almost oppressive silence that settled in the elegant office while Michael meticulously examined each document was almost deafening for Catherine, broken only by the rhythmic sound of pages being carefully turned and the precise notes he occasionally made on a letterhead notepad from his office. Catherine observed with growing anxiety each micro-expression that crossed the experienced and reliable face of the lawyer, noticing how his eyebrows progressively furrowed in signs of disapproval and how his lips contracted into a thin line of growing professional indignation that revealed the gravity of what he was discovering. After approximately an hour of careful, detailed, and thorough analysis, Michael slowly removed his glasses and looked directly into Catherine's brown eyes with an expression that mixed professional incredulity, deep moral indignation, and genuine compassion for the terrible and dangerous situation in which she had almost found herself because of Edward's cruel manipulation. He methodically organized the documents on his polished mahogany desk, separating them into different legal categories while preparing his detailed and technical explanation about the devastating legal implications of what Edward had tried to perpetrate against her. The gravity of the situation was much worse than Catherine had imagined in her worst nightmares or darkest scenarios, and Michael knew that he needed to explain everything with crystal clarity and didacticism so that she could completely comprehend the magnitude of the cowardly and calculated betrayal that she had almost suffered at the hands of her own husband. Catherine, what I have before me are divorce documents already completely filled out and ready to be filed immediately with the appropriate registry, transferring all your personal assets to Edward, explained Michael with a controlled voice but loaded with indignation. My God in heaven, so he really was trying to rob me while I thought I was dying. How can someone be so cruel and calculating with their own wife? Exclaimed Catherine, feeling a burning fury growing in her chest. The discovery of the true criminal nature of the documents hit Catherine like a devastating punch to the stomach, leaving her momentarily breathless as she tried to comprehend and process the depth of the meticulous betrayal that Edward had carefully planned against her for months, or perhaps even years of silent preparation. Michael continued explaining with technical details that the papers also included broad and unrestricted powers of attorney that would give Edward total and absolute control over all financial, medical, property, and even personal decisions related to her, effectively turning her into a legal prisoner in her own life, without any autonomy or decision-making power. Additionally, there were specific and malicious clauses that would prevent any future contestation of the documents or legal questioning of the property transfers, creating a completely irreversible and definitive situation if she had actually signed during her moment of extreme emotional vulnerability caused by the false diagnosis. The lawyer explained with his professional experience that this type of elaborate and sophisticated scheme was more common than popularly imagined, especially in cases involving elderly, sick, or emotionally vulnerable people who were systematically manipulated by close relatives, interested exclusively in inheritance, assets, and financial benefits. Catherine felt an explosive mixture of incandescent anger, deep betrayal, bitter disappointment, and, curiously, an unwavering and unshakable determination to completely turn the tables against Edward, using his own manipulative and calculating strategy against him in a definitive and relentless manner. Michael, this wretch cannot go unpunished after trying to destroy my life in this cowardly way. I need your help to bring justice, declared Catherine, her voice loaded with relentless determination. Catherine, it will be a professional honor to help you unmask Edward and make him pay for this criminal attempt. Let's plan our strategy carefully, responded Michael, clenching his fists with indignation. During the next 2 hours, Catherine and Michael meticulously elaborated a detailed, legal, and effective strategy to expose Edward and his criminal intentions in the most embarrassing, definitive, and legally sound way possible. The lawyer explained that he had important contacts at the police station, specialized in crimes against the elderly and vulnerable people, and that he already had more than enough evidence to legally characterize attempted aggravated fraud, forgery of official documents, misappropriation of assets, and even psychological violence against a person in a vulnerable situation. They agreed that Michael should personally go to Catherine's house the next day, preferably in the late afternoon, when Edward usually returned from his daily commitments and would be relaxed, unprepared, and confident that his plan was working perfectly as planned. Catherine also revealed to the lawyer that after carefully reviewing old bank statements kept in her personal office, she had discovered extremely suspicious and unauthorized financial movements that strongly suggested Edward had been systematically diverting money from the couple's joint account for at least 2 or 3 years. Michael carefully noted all this crucial additional information, building a solid and irrefutable case that could result not only in the complete annulment of the fraudulent documents, but also in the full recovery of illegally diverted values and in Edward's total criminal accountability before justice. The meeting ended with Catherine feeling completely empowered, confident and in control of the situation, knowing that she finally had all the legal and strategic tools necessary to definitively confront the man who had tried to destroy her life by cowardly taking advantage of her supposed imminent death. "Michael, tomorrow I want Edward to discover that he completely underestimated the intelligence of the woman he thought he could easily deceive," declared Catherine, rising from her chair with renewed dignity. "He will learn in the worst possible way that he messed with the wrong person. Men like Edward need to face the consequences of their actions," stated Michael, putting away all the documents. That same afternoon, after returning home with a defined plan and a sense of control she hadn't experienced in days, Catherine decided it was time to start executing her strategy in a subtle but effective way. She called Edward, who was in a business meeting downtown, adopting an affectionate and seemingly melancholic tone of voice that he would interpret exactly as she wanted. During the phone conversation, she casually mentioned that she had spent the day reflecting on her health condition and the uncertain future that awaited them as a couple, creating an emotional atmosphere that would psychologically prepare Edward for what she was about to propose. She suggested they should make the most of the time they had left together to create special and meaningful memories, specifically mentioning that she would like to organize something romantic and unforgettable for them the next day. Edward, believing that she was finally resigning herself to the situation and possibly considering signing the documents he had presented, responded with exaggerated enthusiasm and apparent emotion, promising to come home earlier so they could spend more time together. Catherine knew exactly how to manipulate his expectations, masterfully using his own manipulative nature against him. She ended the conversation in a purposefully ambiguous way, leaving Edward anxious and expectant about what she might be planning for the next day, not imagining that he was walking directly into a carefully prepared trap. "Darling, prepare yourself for a very special surprise when you get home tomorrow. I want to do something truly unforgettable for us both as a couple," said Catherine, carefully controlling the melancholic tone of her voice. "How wonderful, my love. You know how I adore your romantic surprises. It will be a proper final farewell, won't it?" replied Edward, not realizing the dark irony of his own words. Edward arrived home at 5:45 in the afternoon with a satisfied smile on his face and a bouquet of red roses in his hands, expecting to find Catherine preparing the romantic dinner she had promised during the previous day's call. He had spent the entire day in a barely disguised state of euphoria, imagining what that special farewell his wife had mentioned with such affection and melancholy in her voice would be like, firmly believing that she was finally resigning herself to her terminal condition and possibly considering signing the important documents he had presented a few days earlier. Throughout the entire journey home, he mentally rehearsed words of consolation and declarations of eternal love that would sound convincing enough to keep Catherine emotionally vulnerable and receptive to his suggestions about organizing the necessary legal paperwork. His calculating mind was already developing strategies to subtly bring up the subject of the documents again during that special night, taking advantage of the emotional climate she had created to finally get the signatures that would transform all her assets into his exclusive property. Edward pushed the front door with growing expectation, calling Catherine's name with a syrupy and theatrically affectionate voice. But what he found in the living room made him completely stop in his tracks, as if he had been struck by a lightning bolt. "Catherine, my love, I'm home. I brought your favorite flowers for our special farewell night," shouted Edward from the entrance, still not realizing the trap. Edward, "Good that you've arrived. We have a very important visitor waiting for you in the living room," Catherine responded, with an icy calm that immediately alerted him to the danger. Michael was comfortably seated in the main armchair of the living room, wearing his best dark lawyer's suit and with a black leather briefcase full of documents strategically positioned on the center table, creating an atmosphere of legal formality that dramatically contrasted with the romantic environment Edward had imagined finding. Edward's face instantly lost all healthy color, changing from a satisfied rosy tone to a cadaverous pallor that immediately revealed his guilt and absolute terror of being discovered in his criminal intentions. His hands began to visibly tremble as he dropped the bouquet of roses on the floor of the entrance, creating a symbolic contrast between the scattered red flowers and the grim situation that was about to unfold before his terrified eyes. Catherine observed with growing and almost sadistic satisfaction how the man who had tried to rob and deceive her during her moment of greatest vulnerability now found himself completely exposed and defenseless, like a rat caught in a carefully planned trap. Edward desperately tried to regain his composure, running trembling hands through his hair and forcing a fake smile that couldn't hide the absolute panic that had taken over his entire being like deadly poison running through his veins. "Michael, What an unexpected surprise to see you here in our home." "Catherine didn't tell me you would be visiting us this afternoon," stammered Edward, his voice coming out weak and shaky. "Edward, this visit is directly related to some very interesting documents that your wife brought to my office for detailed legal analysis," Michael responded with sharp professional coldness. Michael calmly opened his leather briefcase and began methodically organizing the documents on the coffee table, with precise and calculated movements, the exact same fraudulent papers that Edward had tried to make Catherine sign during her supposed moment of greatest emotional fragility. Edward immediately recognized each sheet, each form, each page that he had carefully crafted during months of secret planning, and felt his stomach violently contract as if he had swallowed pure acid. The cruel irony of the situation was not lost on anyone present. The documents that Edward had meticulously prepared to rob Catherine now became the irrefutable evidence that would prove his guilt and completely destroy his comfortable life and his ambitious plans for easy enrichment. Catherine remained standing next to the armchair where Michael was seated, with arms crossed and an expression of iron determination that Edward had never seen before in 40 years of marriage, as if she had transformed into a completely different person from the submissive and trusting woman he thought he knew perfectly. Her brown eyes shone with a mixture of controlled anger and satisfaction for the justice that was finally being done, while she watched the man who had tried to destroy her life writhe in growing despair. Edward instantly realized that he had completely underestimated the intelligence and determination of the woman he considered an easy prey. "Michael, I can explain all of this. These documents, they are just normal legal precautions that any responsible husband would take in situations like this," Edward desperately lied. "Edward, stop insulting our intelligence with pathetic lies. We know exactly what you were trying to do, and we have all the necessary evidence," Catherine interrupted with icy authority. Edward, realizing that his first line of defense had failed miserably, quickly changed strategy and assumed the posture of a misunderstood victim, trying to convince Michael that Catherine was mentally and emotionally disturbed due to the devastating terminal diagnosis she had recently received. He began to speak rapidly and clumsily about how Catherine had become confused and paranoid since discovering her health condition, claiming that she was misinterpreting his genuinely protective and charitable intentions. With fake tears welling in his blue eyes, Edward theatrically performed a convincing performance of a devoted and concerned husband, explaining to Michael how he had prepared those documents exclusively to protect Catherine from impulsive decisions she might make during the period of intensive treatment. He insisted that the asset transfers were merely temporary protective measures that would ensure Catherine received the best possible medical care without worrying about complicated financial matters during her final days. Edward went so far as to suggest that Catherine needed psychiatric help to deal with the paranoia and distrust that the terminal diagnosis had caused in her fragile mind. His performance was so convincing and loaded with apparent emotion that for a moment even Michael seemed to consider the possibility that there might be some misunderstanding in the situation. "Michael, you need to understand that my wife hasn't been thinking clearly since receiving this terrible diagnosis. She's seeing conspiracies where there is only love and protection," said Edward, forcing tears into his eyes. "I'm just trying to protect her from complicated financial decisions during this very difficult period of her life. These documents are measures of protection, not appropriation," continued Edward, his voice trembling with theatrical emotion. It was at this crucial moment that Catherine decided to reveal the first devastating bomb that would completely destroy Edward's arguments and expose all his lies before the experienced lawyer. With an icy, controlled calm that dramatically contrasted with Edward's hysterical agitation, she announced that she had sought a second medical opinion and discovered that the initial diagnosis was completely wrong, that there was no sign of cancer in her body, and that her life expectancy was perfectly normal for a woman of her age. The revelation hit Edward like a direct shot to the chest, making him stagger slightly, and having to lean on the arm of the sofa to avoid falling, while his face took on an expression of absolute shock mixed with growing terror that his entire diabolical plan was crumbling before his eyes. Catherine explained in detail how she had visited Dr. Helen, how all the exams had been meticulously reanalyzed, and how the specialist had categorically confirmed that she was not dying or in need of any special treatment beyond simple medications for a benign inflammation. Michael carefully observed Edward's reaction throughout the explanation, noting how the man seemed more concerned with the discovery of the farce than relieved by the news that his wife was healthy, a reaction that confirmed all suspicions about his true criminal intentions. Edward desperately tried to reformulate his arguments, but now he no longer had the excuse of the terminal diagnosis to justify his pressure for Catherine to sign the documents without reading them. "Edward, I imagine you'll be happy to know that I'm not dying. The diagnosis was completely wrong, and I have many years of life ahead of me," announced Catherine, observing his reaction with satisfaction. "Now you can explain to Michael why you were in such a hurry for me to sign property transfer documents when you thought I was dying," added Catherine, her voice loaded with cutting sarcasm. Michael, realizing that the moment had come to present the most devastating evidence against Edward, opened a second folder that he had brought specifically for that confrontation and began to methodically expose all the discoveries he had made during his detailed investigation of the couple's financial affairs. With the precision of an experienced prosecutor, he presented bank statements that clearly showed how Edward had been systematically diverting money from the joint account over the past 3 years, making unauthorized transfers to personal accounts and private investments that Catherine was completely unaware of. Michael explained how Edward had used old and legitimate powers of attorney to carry out questionable financial operations, always taking care to keep the individual values low enough not to attract attention, but which added up represented a substantial amount that could have guaranteed a comfortable retirement for both. The lawyer also revealed that he had discovered evidence that Edward maintained secret banking relationships and even investments in the names of third parties, creating a complex network of asset concealment that suggested long-term planning to appropriate the couple's assets. Catherine listened to each revelation with growing indignation, realizing that the attempted scam related to the fraudulent documents was just the tip of the iceberg of a much broader and more sophisticated operation of misappropriation that Edward had been executing for years in the shadows. Edward, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his financial crimes, tried to deny everything, claiming that these were legitimate investments made for the benefit of the couple, but his trembling voice and contradictory arguments only confirmed his guilt to the experienced observers. "Edward, here are the statements that clearly show how you transferred $68,000 from our joint account to personal investments without my authorization or knowledge," said Michael, pointing to the documents. "Furthermore, we discovered that you maintain 3 secret bank accounts at different financial institutions, all fed with money diverted from family assets," Michael continued, with relentless authority. Edward, realizing that he was completely cornered, and without any possibility of denying the irrefutable evidence that Michael had methodically presented, made one last desperate attempt to reverse the situation by assuming a defensive and agitated posture. He raised his voice and began making accusations against Catherine, claiming that she was being manipulated by the lawyer to create an artificial situation of marital conflict that could result in financial benefits for the law firm. Edward went so far as to suggest that Michael and Catherine were conspiring together to falsely incriminate him, creating forged evidence and misinterpreting legitimate financial operations as crimes against family assets. His desperate strategy included veiled threats to sue Michael for illegal practice of law and Catherine for defamation and slander, trying to intimidate both and make them back down from their accusations. However, his aggressive performance only served to definitively confirm his manipulative and potentially dangerous character, making Michael and Catherine feel even more justified in their legal actions against him. Edward made the fatal mistake of revealing information that only someone truly guilty would know, such as specific details about bank transfers and secret investments that Michael had mentioned, unequivocally demonstrating that he knew exactly what the accusations were about. His uncontrolled anger and contradictory arguments created an atmosphere of growing tension in the room, while Catherine and Michael remained calm and determined to take the situation to its inevitable legal consequences. "You two are conspiring to falsely incriminate me. Michael, you are manipulating a vulnerable woman to create a profitable case for your firm," shouted Edward, completely losing his composure. "Edward, you are only confirming your guilt with every word you say. An innocent man would not know these specific details about secret banking operations," Michael responded with devastating calmness. It was at this climactic moment that Edward finally understood the complete magnitude of his desperate situation and realized that he had been completely unmasked, with no possibility of escaping the legal consequences of his criminal actions. His face assumed an expression of absolute terror when Michael explained that he had already gathered all the necessary evidence to characterize multiple crimes: qualified fraud, forgery of official documents, misappropriation of assets, psychological violence against a vulnerable person, and even attempted asset seizure through fraudulent powers of attorney. Edward instantly understood that he would face not only the loss of all the assets he had tried to steal, but also criminal proceedings that could result in years of imprisonment and the complete destruction of his social and professional reputation. In a moment of total panic and absolute desperation, he decided to try to escape the situation, abruptly rising from the chair where he had been sitting and walking quickly toward the front door, muttering something about needing to fetch documents from his car to prove his innocence. Catherine and Michael observed his pathetic escape attempt with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction, knowing that Edward was only digging an even deeper hole for himself with each desperate action he took. Michael calmly informed Edward that his escape attempt would only confirm his guilt before any court and would be interpreted as a tacit confession of all the crimes he was being accused of. "I need to go to my car to get some important documents that will clarify this entire misinterpreted situation. You'll see that I am innocent of all these absurd accusations," Edward lied, desperately heading for the door. "Edward, your escape attempt only confirms your guilt. An innocent man would face the accusations head-on and provide convincing explanations for his actions," said Michael, subtly blocking the path to the exit. Catherine, who had anticipated exactly this desperate reaction from Edward, then revealed her final and most devastating card. She had already called the police specialized in financial crimes even before Michael's arrival, and investigators were on their way to the residence to take Edward in for formal questioning and possible preventive detention. The final revelation hit Edward like a hammer, making him realize that he had voluntarily walked into a perfectly planned and executed trap from which there was no legal or practical possibility of escape. Catherine explained with evident satisfaction that she had coordinated the entire confrontation with the precision of a military operation, ensuring that Edward would be caught in the act of trying to perpetuate his crimes and that all evidence would be presented in the presence of qualified witnesses. Michael confirmed that he had discreetly recorded the entire conversation with prior legal authorization, and that the inadvertent confessions Edward had made during his moments of desperation would be used as additional evidence in all criminal and civil proceedings that would be brought against him. Edward finally understood that he had completely underestimated the intelligence, determination, and organizational capacity of the woman he had tried to rob, and that he would now face the devastating consequences of 40 years of lies, manipulation, and financial crimes that had finally been exposed to the light of justice. The sound of the approaching police siren definitively sealed Edward's fate and marked the beginning of his complete and irreversible downfall. "Edward, I hope you enjoyed my special surprise. The Financial Crimes Police are arriving to conduct your formal interrogation," announced Catherine with glacial satisfaction. "Did you really think you could rob a woman for 40 years and get away with it? Now you'll discover that actions have consequences, my dear ex-husband," Catherine completed, observing the total despair stamped on his face. The first months after Edward's arrest were like a gradual awakening from a nightmare that had lasted years, without Catherine fully realizing the extent of the manipulation she was being subjected to. The judicial process unfolded quickly, with Michael presenting all the evidence in a meticulous and irrefutable manner, resulting in Edward's conviction for multiple crimes: attempted qualified fraud, forgery of official documents, misappropriation of assets, and psychological violence against a vulnerable person. The judge, impressed by the calculated cruelty of Edward's plan, imposed a sentence of 3 years in prison, in addition to ordering full restitution of all diverted funds and payment of compensation for moral damages. Catherine attended all hearings with a serenity that surprised everyone, including Michael, who saw her transform from an apparently fragile and manipulated woman into a strong, determined person in total control of her own life. During the trial, it became evident that Edward had lost not only his freedom, but also his secret lover, Lucy, who abandoned him as soon as she learned of his arrest and the loss of all the assets she believed he legitimately owned. "Michael, I finally feel I can breathe freely after years of living a lie without even realizing it," said Catherine, leaving the courthouse after the final sentence. "Catherine, you've shown admirable courage throughout this process. Now it's time to rebuild your life the way you always deserved," Michael responded with paternal pride. During the first 6 months of her new life as a free woman and full owner of her own assets, Catherine discovered aspects of her personality that had been systematically suppressed during decades of marriage to Edward. She began attending dance classes, rediscovered her passion for gardening, enrolled in a literature course at the local university, and even learned to drive, something Edward had always discouraged, claiming she was too nervous to operate a vehicle safely. It was during one of these dance classes that Catherine met Daniel, a 38-year-old instructor, tall, dark-haired, with an athletic physique and warm smile that immediately made her feel valued and respected in a way she hadn't experienced in decades. Daniel treated all his students with genuine kindness, but Catherine noticed that he showed a special interest in her, always offering to help her with the more difficult steps and sincerely praising her progress and dedication. Initially, Catherine resisted the feelings she began to nurture for Daniel, considering herself too old for romance and worrying about what people would say about the age difference between them. However, Daniel persisted in a respectful and caring manner, demonstrating through everyday gestures that he genuinely loved her for the extraordinary person she was, regardless of her age or any material consideration. "Catherine, you have a natural talent for dancing. It's a pleasure to work with someone who is so dedicated and has such natural elegance," said Daniel after a particularly successful class. "Daniel, you are very kind, but I'm just a lady trying to rediscover who I really am after many lost years," replied Catherine, blushing slightly. The relationship between Catherine and Daniel developed slowly and organically, based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and a deep emotional connection that neither had previously experienced in their lives. Daniel revealed himself as an upright, hard-working, and caring man who admired the strength and determination that Catherine had demonstrated in facing and overcoming Edward's devastating betrayal. He never showed any interest in Catherine's material possessions, consistently rejecting her offers of financial help and insisting on paying his own expenses during the romantic encounters they began to have regularly. Catherine discovered that Daniel had been raised by his grandmother after losing his parents in an accident when he was a child, an experience that had made him deeply empathetic and able to value authentic relationships based on true love and companionship. After 8 months of respectful and passionate dating, Daniel proposed to Catherine during a romantic dinner that he himself prepared in his simple but cozy home, promising to love and respect her for the rest of their lives, regardless of any circumstance the future might bring. Catherine accepted the proposal with tears of happiness, finally understanding the difference between the manipulative and self-interested love that Edward had pretended to feel and the genuine, generous and selfless love that Daniel offered unconditionally. "Catherine, I love you not for what you have, but for who you are. You made me discover that it's possible to love and be truly loved," declared Daniel, kneeling with a simple but meaningful ring. "Daniel, you taught me that I deserve to be loved and respected. Yes, I accept to marry you and build a life based on truth," responded Catherine, extending her left hand. Catherine and Daniel's wedding was an intimate and elegant ceremony, held in the garden of the house that now entirely belonged to Catherine, decorated with flowers that she herself had cultivated during the months of personal reconstruction. Michael served as Catherine's best man, proud to see how the woman he had helped save from a terrible scheme had transformed into a radiant and confident person. The ceremony was officiated by a judge friend of Michael's, and the few guests present were people genuinely dear to Catherine and Daniel, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and authenticity that dramatically contrasted with the pompous but empty wedding Catherine had had with Edward 4 decades earlier. During the marriage vows, both Catherine and Daniel spoke emotionally about second chances, about the importance of finding true love at any stage of life, and about the commitment to build a relationship based on honesty, respect, and genuine companionship. The party that followed was joyful and unpretentious, with Daniel dancing with Catherine under the stars, while the guests applauded and celebrated the authentic love that radiated from the couple. Catherine had never felt so happy, complete and in control of her own destiny, knowing that she had finally found a partner who valued her for her personal qualities and not for her material possessions or social status. "Daniel, today I feel that my life is really beginning. After these years I discovered what it is to be truly loved," said Catherine during their first dance as wife. "Catherine, you taught me that age is just a number when it comes to true love. We are proof that it's never too late to be happy," responded Daniel, spinning her gracefully. The following 2 years were the happiest and most fulfilled of Catherine's life, marked by trips she had always dreamed of taking, personal projects that Edward had always discouraged, and especially by the daily discovery that she deserved to be treated with genuine affection, respect and admiration. Daniel demonstrated his love through everyday gestures. He prepared breakfast every morning, took care of the garden that had become Catherine's passion, massaged her feet after long walks, and especially listened with genuine attention to her opinions, dreams and concerns, without ever trying to control or manipulate her. Catherine flourished under this respectful treatment, developing new hobbies, making authentic friendships, and even considering the possibility of writing a book about her experience of overcoming and personal rebirth. She maintained regular contact with Michael, who had become not just her lawyer, but a dear friend who visited her monthly for lunches during which they talked about literature, politics, and the small pleasures of everyday life. During this period of happiness and stability, Catherine rarely thought about Edward, except occasionally when she read news about financial crimes or when Michael informed her about legal issues related to the restitution of values that had been stolen. She had managed to forgive, not because Edward deserved forgiveness, but because carrying anger and resentment added nothing positive to her new, full and satisfying life. "Daniel, sometimes I can't believe this wonderful life is really mine. You've helped me discover a version of myself that I didn't know existed," Catherine said during a picnic in the park. "Catherine, you've always been this extraordinary person. You just needed someone who knew how to see and value your true essence," Daniel replied, gently kissing her forehead. It was on a sunny September afternoon, exactly 2 years after his arrest, that Edward unexpectedly appeared at Catherine's doorstep, thin, aged, and visibly worn down by the years in prison and the devastating consequences of his criminal actions. Catherine was watering her roses when she heard the doorbell ring, and Daniel, who was painting the front gate, went to answer, without imagining who the unexpected visitor might be. Edward tried to get past Daniel, claiming to be Catherine's husband, and demanding to speak with her about important matters, but was prevented by Daniel's imposing physical presence and respectful firmness, who politely but categorically refused to allow his entry without Catherine's explicit consent. When Catherine recognized Edward's voice coming from the entrance, she felt a mixture of curiosity, disgust, and mainly an absolute certainty that this man no longer held any emotional power over her. She approached the door with Daniel by her side, observing how Edward had aged drastically, lost weight, and especially lost that aura of arrogant confidence that had always characterized him. Edward tried to assume a humble and remorseful posture, but Catherine could see through his performance that he remained fundamentally the same manipulative and self-interested person as always, only now desperate and without resources. "Catherine, my love, I need to talk to you about our situation. I've served my sentence and now I can explain everything that happened," said Edward, trying to force his way in. "Edward, this is no longer your home, and Catherine is no longer your wife. If you have something to say it quickly and leave," Daniel intervened with calm authority. Edward, completely ignoring Daniel's presence and addressing Catherine directly, as if he had the right to demand her attention, began an elaborate speech about repentance, personal change, and the desire to rebuild the marriage that had been temporarily shaken by misunderstandings and adverse circumstances. He claimed that the years in prison had taught him the value of true love, and that he now fully understood the mistakes he had made, promising to dedicate the rest of his life to compensating her and regaining her trust. Edward went so far as to suggest that they could have a ceremony to renew their marriage vows, start a new life together elsewhere, and even have the children they never had during their 40 years of marriage. His performance was loaded with tears that seemed genuine, theatrical gestures of remorse, and grandiose promises about personality change and spiritual transformation that he had supposedly experienced during his period of confinement. However, Catherine coldly observed that Edward showed no genuine curiosity about her current life, her happiness, or her well-being, focusing exclusively on his own sufferings and needs. Even more revealing was the fact that he constantly referred to Catherine's house, possessions, and financial situation, revealing that his motivations remained fundamentally the same as always, only now disguised under a layer of apparent remorse. "Catherine, I've completely changed during these 2 years. Prison made me realize that you are the only person who really matters in my life," Edward begged, forcing tears. "We can start over, my love. I know I made mistakes, but now I'm a different man and I can make you happy as you always deserved," Edward continued, extending his hands toward her. Catherine remained silent for a few moments, observing the man she had once loved and completely trusted, feeling mainly a mixture of pity and contempt for the pathetic and manipulative creature he had always been, but who was now exposed in all his moral mediocrity. She noticed how Edward avoided looking directly at Daniel, as if his presence was just a temporary obstacle that could be removed with the right words and proper strategy. Catherine understood that Edward genuinely believed he could win her back with the same ease with which he had manipulated her for decades, demonstrating that he had learned absolutely nothing about respect, honesty, or true love during his period of forced reflection. With an icy calm that surprised even Daniel, Catherine finally decided to permanently end any emotional connection that might still exist between her and Edward, pronouncing the words that sealed the fate of both forever. She purposely positioned herself beside Daniel, holding his strong and caring hand, creating a clear visual image of where her loyalties and heart lay. Edward observed the gesture with growing understanding and despair, finally realizing that he had lost Catherine definitively and irreversibly, not just legally, but mainly emotionally. "Edward, I want you to observe this scene carefully and engrave it in your memory. This is Daniel, my husband, the man who treats me with the respect and love that you never knew how to give," said Catherine, intertwining her fingers with Daniel's. "You bet on my death to rob me. Now live knowing that I discovered exactly who you always were. Go away and never come back here," Catherine concluded, her voice carrying absolute finality. The sun had barely risen when Dorothy crossed the mirrored doors of the imposing building she knew so well. At 65, her body carried the marks of time, but her brown eyes still shone with the same dedication as 30 years ago when she began working as a coffee lady in that company. Small in stature, with grey hair always impeccably tied in a bun, she wore the navy blue uniform that Harold, the founder, had personally chosen because he considered it elegant and dignified, as everyone who works here deserves to be treated. As she walked down the main corridor toward the executive floor kitchen, she greeted each employee by name, knowing the life stories of almost everyone there. News of Harold's son's arrival to take control was already circulating through the corridors like a cold wind. "Good morning, Dorothy. Today's the day we meet the new boss, isn't it? They say he's quite different from his father," commented Steve, the security guard who had worked there for almost 20 years. "Yes, today's the big day. Harold always spoke of his son with such pride. I hope he inherited his father's heart and not just the family name," Dorothy replied, trying to hide the concern she had felt since learning about Harold's health problem. The executive floor kitchen was Dorothy's domain. There, among imported porcelain cups and sophisticated coffee machines, she had served countless meetings that shaped the company's destiny. She knew each director's preferences, who liked strong coffee, who preferred it with a touch of cinnamon, who always asked for a slice of cake to go with it. Harold used to say that Dorothy knew more about the executives than the entire human resources department. That morning, she prepared everything with special care. The new president's introduction meeting would be at 9 o'clock, and she wanted to impress Michael, to show that the respect his father dedicated to her wasn't in vain. With meticulous movements, she arranged the silver tray with the best china, prepared freshly ground coffee, and organized small typical sweets she knew were the favorites of the most senior directors. "They say he closed 3 companies in the last year and fired hundreds of people. How will he look at an old lady like me?" she murmured to herself while checking if everything was perfect. "Harold, my friend, I hope you recover soon. This company is your legacy, your entire life." The buzz in the corridor announced Michael's arrival before he even appeared. Unlike his father, who always arrived greeting everyone with broad smiles and questions about family, the new president emerged like a storm. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he had the same eyes as his father, but without the warmth. At 40, Michael had already built a reputation in the corporate world, relentless, efficient, and completely focused on numbers. He ignored the employees watching him and went directly to the meeting room, where the executives were already waiting. Dorothy observed the scene from the kitchen door, feeling a tightness in her chest. She adjusted her uniform, picked up the tray prepared with such care, and headed to the room as she had done thousands of times before. "Excuse me, I'm just coming in to serve coffee," she said politely as she opened the door. "Welcome, Mr. Michael. I'm Dorothy. I've worked with your father for 30 years. "I don't recall asking for introductions or interruptions," he replied dryly, without even looking at her. "This meeting is crucial, and we're on a tight schedule. Leave that there and get out." The luxurious office, with its huge glass windows and panoramic view of the city, seemed even more imposing that day. The long, solid wood conference table seated 12 executives, all visibly tense with the change of command. Documents were scattered everywhere, spreadsheets, graphs, performance reports. Michael had demanded access to all figures from the last 5 years, and the atmosphere was one of expectation and fear. Dorothy tried to maintain her composure as she served the coffee, starting with the most senior directors, as she always did. She could feel Michael's impatient gaze burning into her back. Her hands, which already showed signs of age and mild arthritis, trembled slightly as she served each cup. When she finally reached the head of the table, where Michael had taken the place that for decades had belonged to Harold, the trembling increased. "Please be brief. We have a lot of work ahead," he said without looking at her, while leafing through documents. "From today, many things will change in this company. My father may have been complacent, but I am not. Your father is a wise and just man, sir. He built this company by treating people with dignity." Dorothy couldn't contain her comment while placing the coffee cup beside him. The silence in the room was oppressive as Dorothy tried to serve Michael. The stack of documents in front of him looked like an insurmountable mountain, and the new president gestured impatiently as she approached with the cup. It was at that moment that the inevitable happened. Perhaps due to nervousness, perhaps due to the natural tremor of her aged hands, perhaps a whim of fate. The tray tilted a few degrees beyond the acceptable. The coffee, dark and steaming, spilled like a wave across the table, soaking documents, staining meticulously prepared charts, and hitting the sleeve of Michael's impeccable suit. Time seemed to freeze. The executives collectively held their breath. Dorothy stood paralyzed, the tray still in her hands, watching the disaster unfold without being able to do anything to stop it. For heaven's sake! "Look what you've done!" Michael exploded, rising abruptly, his suit stained and important papers ruined. "This is unacceptable. How can you be so incompetent?" "Forgive me, sir. It was an accident. I can clean it. I can fix it." Dorothy desperately tried to repair the damage, grabbing napkins and trying to save the documents. "Please give me a chance." The fury on Michael's face was palpable. His eyes, so similar to his father's but so different in expression, were fixed on Dorothy as if she were a criminal. The luxurious office, with its expensive furniture and artwork on the walls, suddenly seemed too small to contain his anger. As the executives watched in silence, unable or too fearful to intervene, Michael began gathering the soaked papers with abrupt movements. Drops of coffee dripped onto the polished wooden table, marking like dark tears what seemed to be the end of an era. Dorothy, still trying to help, offered napkins she took from her uniform pocket, her hands now trembling uncontrollably. Humiliation burned on her face like fire, as decades of dedicated service seemed to evaporate in that instant. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Michael. It never happened before, in 30 years of service. Your father always said that we all make mistakes," she began, her voice as shaky as her hands. "My father is no longer in charge. I am, and this is unacceptable," he shouted, throwing the wet papers on the table. "You're fired. Get out of my company now." Dorothy's world collapsed with those words. 30 years of dedication, of arriving before dawn and leaving after everyone had gone, of knowing every detail of that company and caring for everything as if it were her own home. All of it swept away by a seconds-long accident. She felt her legs weaken and had to lean on the table to avoid falling. She looked around at the faces of executives she had known for so long, seeking some support, some defense, but found only lowered gazes and embarrassed expressions. No one dared challenge the new president on his first day. No one would risk their own job to defend an elderly server, no matter how beloved she was. "Please, sir, it was an accident. I'm 65, I won't easily find another job," Dorothy pleaded, dignity fighting against despair in her voice. "My granddaughter is sick. She needs expensive medication. Your father knows my situation. He always helped me." "That's not my problem," Michael cut her off, adjusting his stained sleeve with a napkin. "If you can no longer do your job properly, that's exactly why you should have been replaced long ago. Efficiency is what matters now. Collect your belongings and leave before I call security." With what little dignity she could gather, Dorothy placed the tray on the table, straightened her shoulders and looked one last time at that room where she had served for decades. The walls witnessed so many stories, the paintings she had seen being hung, the view of the city that had changed over the years, while she remained constant and dedicated. Silent tears ran down her wrinkled face as she slowly walked to the door. No farewell words, no thanks for the years of service, just the heavy silence of an era ending in the worst possible way. "Harold would never treat me like this," she murmured quietly, more to herself than to others. "He always said that a company is made of people, not papers and numbers." The path to the kitchen, where she kept her few belongings, never seemed so long. Employees who saw her pass by with tears in her eyes and head lowered immediately understood what had happened. Fear spread like wildfire. If not even Dorothy, with 30 years in the house and beloved by the founder, was safe, who would be? She collected her worn purse, a photo of her granddaughter, a small notebook where she wrote down each executive's preferences, and left through the back door as if wanting to hide her shame from the world. The security guard at the gate, who had seen her come in every day for decades, didn't know what to say when he saw her leave like that, in the middle of the morning, with red eyes and uncertain steps. "Dorothy, what happened? Is everything okay?" he asked, concerned about the elderly woman's visible distress. "It's over, Steve. 30 years of dedication ended in an instant because my old hands spilled coffee on the new boss's papers," she replied, her voice choked with held-back tears. "How will I tell my granddaughter? How will I pay for her medicine now?" The journey to her humble home in the outskirts was a blur of pain and worry. Dorothy barely noticed the familiar streets, the neighbors who greeted her, the small market where she bought food whenever she received her salary. Her mind was stuck in that meeting room, in Michael's hard stare, in the cruel words that still echoed in her ears. "You're fired. Get out of my company now. Out of my—" Like a relentless verdict, a sentence not just for her but for her sick granddaughter, who depended on her care and the money she earned to buy the necessary medications. Upon arriving home, a simple two-bedroom construction she had managed to buy with many years of savings, Dorothy felt the weight of an entire life collapsing on her tired shoulders. How could I be so careless? So many years without ever making such a mistake. Why today? Why with him? She lamented, as she carefully folded her uniform and put it away in the closet. Harold, my friend, what will become of me now? With slow and heavy steps, Dorothy headed to the small cabinet in the bathroom where she kept her granddaughter's medications. She opened the door with apprehension, already knowing what she would find but still shocked by the sight. Only empty packages without the essential medicines that should have been purchased with the salary she would receive next week. Salary that would no longer come. Holding the framed photograph of her granddaughter, a girl of just 10 years old with a radiant smile despite the disease that limited her movements, Dorothy felt her legs give way. She slowly slid to the floor, embracing that image, her last point of light now obscured by clouds of uncertainty and despair. "Forgive me, my girl," she whispered to the photograph, as if the child could hear her. "Grandma failed you today." It was at that moment, in the depths of her despair, that the telephone rang, a strident, alarming sound that cut through the silence of her pain. With difficulty, Dorothy got up and walked to the small table where the old device rested. Her hands trembled even more now as she picked up the receiver. On the other end of the line, the formal voice of an attendant from the hospital where her granddaughter was admitted for routine tests froze what little blood still ran in her veins. "Mrs. Dorothy, we need you to come immediately. There has been a complication with your granddaughter." "I'll be there in an hour," Dorothy responded to the hospital nurse, her trembling voice contrasting with the determination in her eyes. The news about the complication in Sarah's tests was the final blow on that disastrous day. First, the humiliating dismissal, now her granddaughter's hospitalization. Hanging up the phone, she rose from the floor with difficulty, put the girl's photo in her pocket and hurried out, ignoring the fatigue that weighed on her bones. Time passed since that terrible day, 7 days that completely transformed Dorothy's life. Sarah had been discharged after 3 days of hospitalization, with an even longer list of medications and strict medical recommendations. Dorothy's modest retirement barely covered both their basic needs, let alone the specialized treatment that Sarah's rare condition required. The morning sun illuminated the small kitchen table where bills accumulated, electricity with final notice in red, hospital invoice with impossible figures, receipts for half-purchased medications, and most alarming of all, 3 notifications of late rent. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she tried, for the 10th time that week, to make calculations that never added up. "How could I be so careless not to save more money for emergencies?" she murmured to herself, pressing her aching temples. "All those years of work, and now I barely have enough to feed my granddaughter for another week." Her granddaughter, Sarah, a 10-year-old girl with a smile that illuminated Dorothy's world even on the darkest days, slept in the small room next door. The visit to the hospital the previous week had turned into an emergency admission, fortunately now resolved, but the doctor had been emphatic there could be no interruption in the treatment. The medications needed to be administered daily without fail. Dorothy got up, walked to the bedroom door, and observed the girl sleeping, breathing peacefully, oblivious to the worries consuming her grandmother. The rare disease affecting her movements had stabilized with the expensive treatment, but any interruption could mean a serious relapse. Dorothy closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her responsibility like a mountain on her shoulders. "I'll find a way, my little one," she whispered to the sleeping girl, her voice choked with emotion. "Your grandmother has never given up before, and won't give up now. I promise." With renewed determination, Dorothy put on her best clothes, a simple outfit but well pressed and clean, and prepared for another day of job hunting. She had visited all the nearby businesses, left her name at stores, restaurants, even offered to work as a cleaner in homes. That morning's newspaper, which she had borrowed from a neighbor, was open to the classifieds section with some advertisements circled in red pen. Her last hope was a position for a coffee attendant at a law firm downtown. Before leaving, she checked Sarah's medications. Only enough doses remained for 2 more days. The cruel reality was there, counted in small, colorful pills that kept her granddaughter functioning normally. "God, please help me today," she prayed softly, arranging her gray hair in an impeccable bun. "It's not for me. It's for my girl. She doesn't deserve to suffer for a mistake I made." The journey to the law firm was long and tiring. Dorothy saved every penny, choosing to walk instead of taking the bus when the distance allowed. Her 65-year-old body protested with pains in her knees, but her determination never wavered. She arrived at the commercial building 20 minutes early for the interview, took a deep breath and held her head high, as Harold always said was important. "Dignity, Dorothy, is something nobody can take from you unless you allow it." The receptionist, a young woman of no more than 20, looked at her with an expression that mixed pity and discomfort when she introduced herself. Dorothy knew what that look meant. She had seen it 6 times that week. "May I help you, ma'am?" asked the receptionist, while typing something on the computer without really looking at Dorothy. "I'm here for the coffee attendant position interview. I have an appointment scheduled for 10 o'clock. "My name is Dorothy," she replied, keeping her voice firm, despite the nervousness she felt. The office was elegant, although much smaller than the company where she had worked for 30 years. The interview was brief, almost superficial. The administrative manager asked protocol questions about her experience, nodding distractedly while she detailed her years of dedicated service. Dorothy could note the exact moment when he lost interest. It was when she mentioned her age. The cordial smile transformed into a politely distant expression. Before even finishing the interview, she already knew what the outcome would be. The final words came wrapped in an artificial kindness that only made the rejection more painful. "Your experience is impressive, Dorothy. I have no doubt that you are extremely competent," said the manager, standing up and extending his hand to prematurely end the interview. "But I believe we are looking for someone with a slightly different profile for the position." "You mean someone younger, don't you?" Dorothy couldn't contain the question, her tone revealing the accumulated frustration of a week of identical rejections. "I have 30 years of experience, never missed a day, know all the secrets to good service, but none of that matters because I have wrinkles on my face." The manager looked embarrassed for a moment, but quickly recovered his professional posture. The embarrassment lasted only an instant, replaced by the polite expression that people in positions of power use when they need to say no without seeming cruel. Dorothy already knew that expression. It was the same one she saw on the executives' faces when Michael humiliated her in front of everyone. The momentary silence in the office spoke louder than any verbal response could. "We will contact you if there is any position suitable for your profile. We appreciate your interest in our company," he finally replied, his voice laden with false cordiality. "The receptionist will escort you to the exit." The way back home was even more difficult than the journey there. Each step felt heavy as lead. Each breath seemed insufficient for her tired lungs. Dorothy had lost count of the rejections. 7, 8. She had lost track of how many times she had heard, "We need someone younger," or "We're looking for a different profile," or even, "We'll keep your resume in our database." Gentle euphemisms to say that her time had passed, that her experienced hands were no longer welcome in the job market. The midday sun punished the streets, making the short journey to the bus stop seem like an endless crossing. An elderly lady like her, under that heat, walking with her head down, was just another anonymous figure in the big city, invisible to the hurried eyes of passers-by. 30 years of work and this is how it ends, she thought, while waiting for the bus that would take her back to her neighborhood. Not even a chance to prove my worth. Just one look at my wrinkles, and I'm already discarded. When she finally reached her street, Dorothy spotted a man standing in front of her house. Tall, formally dressed, with a briefcase in hand. Her heart immediately raced. She knew that type of figure, had already seen neighbors receive similar visits. She quickened her pace, ignoring the pain in her knees, fearing what that presence meant. As she approached, she confirmed her fears. A court officer with a serious expression and documents in hand. Sarah, who was playing in the small front garden, ran to hug her grandmother, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "Mrs. Dorothy?" asked the man, consulting the papers in his briefcase. "I have an eviction order here. You are 3 months behind on rent. The landlord grants you a 5-day period to vacate the property. 5 days? But that's impossible. I've always paid on time, only in these last few months. Dorothy tried to explain, her voice failing as she held the papers with trembling hands. I recently lost my job. I'm looking for another one. Please, I need more time. The officer maintained a neutral expression, avoiding the elderly woman's pleading look. It was just another day of work for him, just another eviction among dozens he executed monthly. For Dorothy, however, that moment marked the complete collapse of her life. Without a job, without a home, with a sick child to care for, options were rapidly running out, like water slipping through fingers. After delivering the official documents and fulfilling his role, the man left, leaving behind a petrified Dorothy on the sidewalk, holding the papers that formalized her misfortune. "Grandma, why are you crying?" asked Sarah, pulling her sleeve, her big brown eyes full of childish concern. "Who was that man? Did he make you sad?" "It's nothing, my dear, just some papers for Grandma to resolve," replied Dorothy, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's go inside. I'll prepare something for us to eat." Inside the house, while Sarah drew at the kitchen table, Dorothy began to gather their belongings, methodically organizing what they could take with them and what they would have to leave behind. Each object carried memories, each photograph told a story. 30 years in that simple house conquered with so much sacrifice, all of Sarah's birthdays celebrated there, all the small victories against the disease celebrated within those walls. Now, everything would be reduced to what they could carry in a few suitcases. While separating clothes and important documents, she tried to maintain composure for Sarah, but inside a growing desperation threatened to consume her. "Where will we go, my God? How will I maintain her treatment?" she whispered to herself, silent tears wetting the clothes she carefully folded. "Who will take in an old woman with a sick child?" It was while emptying an old drawer that Dorothy found something she had completely forgotten, a photograph yellowed by time, protected by a simple wooden frame. It was from the company's inauguration 30 years ago. There she was, much younger, beside Harold, who smiled proudly in front of the newly constructed building. He had his arm over her shoulder, in a gesture that demonstrated the respect and friendship that always marked their relationship. It wasn't just employer and employee, it was a partnership of mutual trust. Dorothy ran her fingers over the image, remembering that day as if it were yesterday. Harold had given an emotional speech about how a company was built by people, not by walls or machines. She turned the photo over, and to her surprise found something handwritten on the back, a phone number, followed by the words, "For emergencies, I'll always be here. Harold." "How could I forget this?" she murmured, examining the faded but still legible numbers. "He gave me this personal number years ago, said it was for truly serious cases." Dorothy held the photograph against her chest, feeling torn. She knew about Harold's serious health condition. His heart problem had taken him away from running the company. Calling now during his recovery seemed selfish. On the other hand, she was truly desperate, and he had always told her she could count on him under any circumstance. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone on the small table in the living room. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the buttons, the conflict evident on her wrinkled face. She thought of Sarah, of the medications that would run out in 2 days, of the eviction notice, of doors closed in her face because of her age. "Forgive me, Harold," she said softly, beginning to dial the numbers. "I have no one else to turn to." Each ring of the telephone sounded like an eternity. Dorothy closed her eyes, holding the yellowed photograph as if it were a protective talisman. After 4 rings, someone answered. It wasn't Harold's familiar voice, but rather a woman, probably a nurse. Dorothy took a deep breath, gathering courage to speak, to explain her desperate situation, to beg for help without seeming to be taking advantage of her former boss's kindness. "Good afternoon. I would like to speak with Mr. Harold, please," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "Tell him it's Dorothy, who worked at his company for 30 years. I wouldn't call if it weren't extremely important." In the hospital, Harold's luxurious room was silent, except for the constant beeping of the cardiac monitors. The nurse, surprised by the call on that personal number that rarely rang, looked at the motionless patient in bed. Harold was conscious but weakened, connected to tubes and devices that monitored every aspect of his fragile condition. The recovery from his heart problem was slow, more difficult than the doctors had initially predicted. When the nurse mentioned Dorothy's name, something changed in Harold's expression. A spark of recognition crossed his tired eyes. "Sir, it's someone named Dorothy. She seems desperate," the nurse informed, bringing the phone closer to him hesitantly. "Should I tell her you can't take the call?" Harold's eyes widened slightly upon hearing his faithful employee's name. He made a weak gesture with his hand, asking for the phone. The moment the nurse handed it to him, the cardiac monitors began to show changes in his heartbeat, a sudden increase in frequency that made the machine emit an audible alert. The concern for Dorothy, the person who had accompanied his entire business journey, who knew every detail of his routine, every preference, every habit, was evident in his immediate physical reaction. "Dorothy," he murmured into the phone, his voice weak but determined while the heart monitor recorded increasingly accelerated beats. "What happened? Tell me everything." The hospital room where Harold was recovering contrasted drastically with the simplicity of Dorothy's home. Walls in light tones adorned with discreet paintings, polished marble floors, state-of-the-art medical equipment, and a panoramic view of the city through large windows composed the environment reserved for the wealthiest patients. On the adjustable bed, Harold held the phone with slightly trembling hands, his fingers marked by intravenous tubes. The cardiac monitors recorded the acceleration in his heartbeat as he listened with growing attention to Dorothy's desperate account on the other end of the line. Each of her words seemed to physically affect him, making his face pale even more under the fluorescent light. The nurse observed attentively, ready to intervene if vital parameters exceeded safe limits. "My son did this? Michael fired you after 30 years of loyal service?" Harold asked, his voice weak but laden with indignation. "Dorothy, listen to me carefully. What happened is unforgivable and goes against everything I built in that company. I will resolve this immediately." While Dorothy continued her account of the eviction notice and the critical situation of her granddaughter, Harold's countenance gradually transformed. The fragility of the convalescent patient gave way to the determination of the businessman who had built an empire with hard work and unwavering values. With a firm gesture, he interrupted the nurse who was trying to convince him to end the call, arguing about his delicate condition. His eyes sparkled with renewed energy, as if indignation were fuel enough to overcome the physical limitations imposed by the disease. He adjusted himself in bed with visible effort, ignoring the pain that the movement caused in his recently operated chest. "Don't interrupt me," he said to the nurse with surprising authority. "Dorothy, don't worry about the eviction or your granddaughter's medicine. I will send my personal lawyer to your home immediately. He will bring enough money to resolve your immediate needs and precise instructions about what we will do next. Mr. Harold, please don't get agitated." "The doctor was very clear about the need for absolute rest after surgery," insisted the nurse, checking the monitors with growing concern. "If you continue like this, I'll have to call the doctor on duty." After ending the call with firm promises of help, Harold requested his cell phone, kept in a nearby drawer since his hospitalization. The nurse hesitated, citing hospital protocols and medical recommendations against stress and activities that could compromise his recovery. The businessman, however, was not willing to negotiate. With a determination that surprised even the experienced professional, he removed one of the cardiac sensors from his arm, triggering the monitor's alarm. The calculated gesture immediately brought two other nurses to the room, creating exactly the distraction he needed to reach the cell phone without interference. "I am perfectly lucid and in control of my mental faculties," he declared firmly to the professionals trying to restrain him. "I need to make 2 urgent calls that cannot wait. After that, I promise to cooperate with any necessary procedure. But now give me 10 minutes of privacy." "Mr. Harold," Dr. Castro was very specific. "Any cardiac alteration can compromise all the work of the surgery. Please understand that we are just following protocols for your own good," argued the head nurse, trying a firmer approach. The first call was to his trusted lawyer, who had been serving Harold for more than 20 years. The conversation was brief and objective. Precise instructions were transmitted. Visit Dorothy immediately, provide emergency financial support, resolve the eviction issue with the property owner, and most importantly, prepare specific documents to be taken to the company the following morning. The lawyer, accustomed to the efficiency required by his client, did not question the unusual orders, only took detailed notes and ensured that everything would be executed as requested. While speaking, Harold observed through the window the movement of the city below, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and responsibility that had always guided his decisions as a business leader and as a human being. "Benjamin, I want you to understand the gravity of the situation," Harold explained, his voice gaining strength with each word. "My son is destroying everything I built, not just physical structures or numbers in financial statements, but the fundamental values I have always stood for. Our company was not built on exploitation or disrespect, and I will not allow it to transform into that in my absence." "I understand perfectly, sir. I will personally take care of every detail. Mrs. Dorothy will receive all necessary support, and the documents will be ready for tomorrow as requested. Should I inform your son about these measures?" asked the lawyer, anticipating possible complications. The second call was to his personal doctor, demanding immediate hospital discharge, against all recommendations from the team. The discussion was heated, with the doctor listing the risks of interrupting treatment and supervised recovery. Harold, however, was unyielding. It wasn't about stubbornness or impulsivity. It was a matter of principles, of correcting an injustice committed in his name, using a company that carried his values. After almost 20 minutes of argumentation, an agreement was established. He would be discharged under his own responsibility, with the condition of keeping a private nurse 24 hours and returning immediately to the hospital if he presented any alarming symptoms. "Doctor, I understand your concern and I appreciate it. But there are different types of healing, and at this moment my soul needs repair as much as my body," argued Harold, with a serenity that contrasted with the gravity of his decision. "If I don't correct what is happening, no medical treatment will bring peace to my heart. As your doctor for 15 years, I know it's useless to argue when you make a decision based on your principles. I will sign the discharge under responsibility, but I am registering my formal protest, and I demand that you maintain continuous cardiac monitoring and the nurse I will designate," replied the doctor, acknowledging the lost battle. Meanwhile, at the company headquarters, Michael was conducting a meeting with key executives, celebrating the results of the first measures of modernization and efficiency implemented in just 1 week. Impressive graphics on the screen showed reductions in operational costs, mainly due to the personnel cuts he had made. Employees who had been with the company for decades were replaced by young recent graduates with significantly lower salaries. Processes were restructured, aiming for maximum productivity, often at the expense of the well-being of the remaining employees. The meeting room, previously a space for collaborative discussions under Harold's management, had transformed into a stage for authoritarian monologues by his son. "Gentlemen, these numbers are just the beginning," declared Michael, with a satisfied smile while pointing to the projections on the screen. "My father built a solid business, but was too compassionate. Today's market doesn't forgive sentimentality or attachments to unproductive employees. With all due respect, Mr. Michael, some of the layoffs have generated a negative impact on the organizational climate. People like Dorothy were more than employees, they were part of the company culture," dared to comment a veteran director, carefully choosing his words. The vibration of his cell phone interrupted the acid response that Michael was preparing. The hospital name on the screen momentarily made his heart race. Since taking control of the company, he had visited his father only twice a week, always with brief conversations focused on performance reports that he knew Harold would not fully approve. The call, however, didn't bring news about his father's health condition, but rather the alarming information that he had left the hospital against medical recommendations, signing a liability waiver and departing in a private ambulance to an unknown destination. "What do you mean, disappeared? You are a first-rate hospital, not a neighborhood clinic. How do you allow a post-cardiac surgery patient to simply walk out the doors without proper supervision?" he vociferated on the phone, his face visibly reddening before the executives who watched the scene with evident discomfort. "Mr. Michael, your father is legally capable and made this decision consciously. We signed the necessary documents and advised him of the risks." The nurse assigned to accompany him tried to inform where they were going, but he expressly prohibited that information from being shared, even with family members, the hospital administrator patiently explained. Panic took over Michael. He abruptly abandoned the meeting, leaving the executives confused and apprehensive. His father, still recovering from delicate heart surgery, had simply disappeared. Terrifying possibilities multiplied in his mind as he drove frantically around the city, visiting places where he imagined his father might have gone. Despite the complicated relationship they had developed in recent years, with diametrically opposed business visions, Michael genuinely worried about his father's health. Or perhaps, on a deeper level that he was reluctant to admit, he feared losing control of the company if something happened to Harold before the transition was legally consolidated. "Dad, what are you doing? Why leave like this, risking your life?" he muttered, while repeatedly checking his cell phone, waiting for news. "Whatever you've discovered about my changes to the company, we can discuss rationally, without drama. Sir, we've checked all the listed addresses, and there's no sign of your father at any of them," his assistant informed him by phone, after hours of fruitless searching. The ambulance driver confirms he dropped him off at an address downtown, but was instructed not to reveal the specific location. At that same moment, at the other end of the city, in Dorothy's humble residence, the doorbell rang. Still dazed by the conversation with Harold and incredulous about the promise of help, she opened the door with hesitation. A middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in a formal suit, carrying a genuine leather briefcase, introduced himself as Benjamin, Harold's personal lawyer. Without many initial explanations, he entered the small living room and observed the partially packed suitcases and belongings organized for the imminent eviction. His professional expressions softened when he noticed the pale girl sitting on the sofa, clearly debilitated, leafing through a worn-out book. "Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Harold sent me to resolve your situation immediately," he said, opening the briefcase and removing envelopes and documents. "First, here is an amount to cover your emergency needs, medicines, food, and any medical expenses for your granddaughter." "Is this real? Did Harold really send help so quickly?" asked Dorothy, holding the envelope with trembling hands, almost fearing that everything was just a dream born of her despair. "I haven't spoken to him for more than a week, since his son fired me." The lawyer methodically explained the next steps, while Dorothy listened in shock. The eviction problem would be resolved immediately. Not only would the back rent be paid off, but Harold had ordered the purchase of the property and the transfer of the deed to Dorothy's name in recognition of decades of loyal service. The medications for her granddaughter would be delivered within an hour, after Benjamin personally placed the order at the specialized pharmacy that served Harold's family. However, the most surprising was yet to come. With careful formality, the lawyer removed a final envelope from his folder and handed it to Dorothy. "This is both an invitation and an instruction, Mrs. Dorothy," he explained, as she carefully opened the envelope. "Mr. Harold requests that you attend the company headquarters tomorrow, promptly at 9 o'clock in the morning. Wear your best clothes and be prepared for an important meeting. A driver will come to pick you up." "But I don't understand. Why does Harold want me to go to the company? After the way I was humiliated and fired, I don't know if I could face those people again," replied Dorothy, confused and apprehensive. "And Michael certainly won't be happy to see me there." With a slight, enigmatic smile suggesting knowledge of plans he couldn't fully reveal, Benjamin stored the signed documents in his briefcase. Before leaving, he gave Dorothy a card with his personal contacts, ensuring availability in case of any need until their meeting the following morning. At the door, he observed again the modest environment, impeccably clean and organized, despite adverse circumstances, a reflection of its residents' dignity and character. His final comment before leaving left Dorothy even more intrigued about what was to come. "Mr. Harold told me to convey a final message. Prepare to return to the company, but not as before. Loyalty and dignity always find their way back, often through unexpected paths. He said you would understand the meaning tomorrow," revealed Benjamin with a brief farewell nod. "Until tomorrow, Mrs. Dorothy. Rest easy tonight. How can I thank you for all this?" "Tell Harold his kindness has saved 2 lives today," responded Dorothy, tears of relief and gratitude shining in her tired eyes. "I'll be ready tomorrow promptly." The night was long for Michael. After hours of fruitless searching, he returned to his luxurious apartment downtown, exhausted and worried. Attempts to contact his father's cell phone went straight to voicemail. No one in his close circle had any information about Harold's whereabouts. Anxiety prevented him from sleeping properly, and the first rays of sun found him already awake, preparing to go to the company earlier than usual. Something told him answers might be there. Perhaps his father, in an act of rebellion against the implemented changes, had decided to return to the office to try to regain control. The idea deeply disturbed him. He wasn't prepared for a direct confrontation with Harold about his management decisions, especially in front of employees. If he showed up at the company, I need to be there first, prepare the ground, avoid a public confrontation, he thought, while driving through the still empty streets of Dawn. Dad, why couldn't you simply trust me to modernize what you built? Why this resistance to necessary changes? Perhaps because some changes destroy much more than they build, his conscience answered, in a voice uncomfortably similar to Harold's. Upon arriving at the company, Michael immediately noticed something different in the atmosphere. The security guards at reception, normally effusive in their morning greetings, merely nodded respectfully with indefinable expressions. In the elevator, he encountered two department managers who abruptly interrupted their conversation when he entered, exchanging meaningful glances that didn't go unnoticed. In the corridors of the executive floor, employees moved with unusual energy for that hour, whispering among themselves and quickly dispersing when he approached. Something was definitely happening, and he apparently was the only one not informed. "Good morning, Mr. Michael," his secretary greeted with a tense smile. "There are visitors waiting in your office. They arrived about 20 minutes ago." "Visitors? I don't have any meetings scheduled for this morning. Who authorized them to enter my office without my presence?" he questioned irritably, walking with long strides toward the presidential office. "And why is everyone acting so strangely today? Your father is among the visitors, sir. He arrived accompanied by his lawyer and—" "Dorothy," replied the secretary hesitantly, carefully observing his reaction. He requested that no one inform him in advance. The impact of those words was like a physical blow. Michael stopped abruptly in the middle of the hallway, processing the information. His father had returned to the company, bringing with him precisely the employee he had humiliatingly fired on his first day as president. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. Clearly, Harold had discovered the incident and was preparing some kind of intervention. With his heart racing and his mind swirling between indignation and apprehension, Michael resumed his determined walk toward the office, determined to maintain control of the situation, whatever his father's intention might be. So that's why he disappeared from the hospital. To orchestrate some kind of public confrontation, he muttered to himself, nervously adjusting his tie. After everything I've done to increase this company's efficiency, to prepare it for the future. Employees clustered discreetly in the corridors, trying not to appear obvious in their curiosity about the imminent encounter. Michael could feel the gazes following him, some with evident expectation, others with poorly disguised satisfaction, especially those who had lost close colleagues in the recent layoffs. A few meters from his office door, he involuntarily slowed down, as if approaching a court where he would be judged. He took a deep breath, composed his best expression of controlled authority, and turned the doorknob. The scene he found inside the office surpassed his most surreal expectations. Sitting in his own presidential chair, behind the imposing oak desk that symbolized maximum power in the company, was Dorothy. The elderly server who a week ago was crying and begging not to be fired, now literally occupied his place, dressed in an elegant business outfit he had never seen her wear. Beside her, in a wheelchair but with an upright posture and firm gaze, was Harold, visibly physically debilitated but emanating an unwavering authority. Standing near the window, the family lawyer held a folder with documents, his professional expression masking any personal emotion about the situation. The silence that followed Michael's entrance was dense enough to be cut with a knife. "Dad? What does this mean? Everyone's been looking for you since yesterday," he finally exclaimed, deciding to attack from the angle of concern, rather than immediately confronting the strange configuration of the office. "The doctors said your departure from the hospital was extremely irresponsible." "Good morning, son. We've closed your office door for a few minutes." "We have important matters to discuss before we summon the rest of the board," Harold responded, with disturbing calmness, gesturing for the lawyer to approach with the documents. "I believe we have some fundamental disagreements about what it means to lead this company." Michael remained standing by the entrance, unable to fully process the surreal scene before him. His gaze alternated between his father, the lawyer, and mainly Dorothy. Sitting in his chair with a serene dignity he would never have associated with the humble server he had fired. The implicit message in the configuration was clear and deliberately provocative. Some profound transformation had occurred, some decision had been made, and he was about to discover how his brief reign as company president was coming to an end as unexpectedly as it had begun. "What is Dorothy doing in my chair? And what documents are those?" he finally asked, his voice betraying the mixture of confusion and indignation he felt. "Dad, if this is some kind of lesson or symbolic demonstration, I think you're going too far." "No, son, this is not a symbol or a temporary lesson," Harold replied, his penetrating gaze fixed on Michael. "This is a course correction. Starting today, Dorothy officially assumes the Directorship of Human Resources and Employee Welfare, a new department with veto power over any decision affecting our staff. And you, my son, will learn the value of each function in this company, beginning with serving coffee at the next meetings." The tension in Michael's office was palpable. The charged atmosphere was briefly interrupted when the secretary gently knocked on the half-open door, announcing that the directors were waiting in the main meeting room as requested by Harold. The lawyer gathered the documents scattered on the desk and, with a discreet nod, indicated it was time to proceed. Harold adjusted himself in the wheelchair, while Dorothy rose with dignity from the presidential chair she had momentarily occupied, a symbolism that escaped no one in that room. It was time for the final confrontation, no longer in a private setting, but in front of all company leadership. "Let's go, son," said Harold, his firm voice contrasting with the apparent fragility of his body. "There are important decisions to be communicated, and I prefer to do it just once in front of everyone." "Father, please, think carefully about what you're doing," Michael implored, his tone alternating between frustration and desperation. "Any drastic change now could destabilize the company you built yourself. I was just trying to modernize it, make it more efficient, more competitive." The path to the meeting room, normally covered in seconds, seemed like an eternity. Employees stopped their activities to observe the strange procession. Harold in his wheelchair, pushed by his lawyer, Dorothy, the former coffee lady now formally dressed, walking with serene dignity, and Michael, visibly disturbed, closing the improvised procession. The corridors never seemed so long, nor the gazes so intense. Whispers followed their passage like waves, spreading through departments with impressive speed. "Is that her? Miss Dorothy, who was fired last week? What's happening?" asked a young assistant to his supervisor, not bothering to lower his voice. "Old Harold is back, and apparently he didn't like his son's changes." "This is going to be interesting," replied the supervisor, not hiding a smile of satisfaction. The company's main meeting room had always been the heart of major decisions. With its imposing oval table in dark wood, ergonomic leather chairs, and panoramic view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows, the environment had witnessed 3 decades of growth and transformation under Harold's leadership. On the walls, historical photographs documented important moments: the inauguration of the first office, the acquisition of competing companies, awards for social responsibility, charity events. In each image, the same spirit shone through: business success founded on human values. When the double doors opened, the 12 directors were already positioned in their usual places. The immediate silence that established itself was almost deafening. Expressions of surprise, confusion, and on some older faces, poorly disguised satisfaction, revealed the whirlwind of emotions that unexpected entrance provoked. Harold was positioned at the head of the table, with Dorothy to his right and the lawyer to his left. Michael, hesitant, remained standing, as if he didn't exactly know where he should sit in this new power configuration. "Good morning, everyone," Harold began, his voice surprisingly strong for someone who had recently undergone heart surgery. "I know my presence here is unexpected, considering my health condition. However, there are situations that cannot wait, decisions that need to be made immediately, when the fundamental values of this company are violated. "Mr. Harold, it's a pleasure to see you recovered. We were all very concerned," expressed a veteran director, breaking the initial ice. "May I ask what brings Miss Dorothy to this meeting? I believe there was an incident last week." Harold's gaze slowly traveled over each face present, as if individually assessing the character of each person at the table. His eyes lingered a bit longer on the older directors, those who had witnessed the company's growth since the early years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried not just authority but a deep disappointment that seemed to reach each of those present. "An incident, as you kindly defined it, Jennifer? No. What occurred was a complete violation of everything this company stands for. Dorothy, who faithfully served this company for 30 years, was humiliated and fired for accidentally spilling coffee during her service," he declared, pausing to let the weight of the words settle. "I ask you, directors and leaders whom I personally chose, who in this room protested against this injustice? Who defended a loyal employee who dedicated half of her life to this company?" The embarrassed silence that followed was answer enough. Heads lowered, gazes diverted to documents suddenly extremely interesting. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. Nobody had spoken up, all fearing for their own positions under the new administration. Harold nodded slowly, as if confirming a painful suspicion. "As I thought. Fear silences even the most just among us," he continued, his voice now softer but no less impactful. "What many of you don't know is that Dorothy wasn't just a coffee lady. For 3 decades, she was my eyes and ears in this company. In her seemingly humble position, she identified and reported directly to me numerous cases of dishonesty, harassment, and misconduct that could have cost the company millions." Expressions of genuine surprise appeared on almost all faces. Michael, still standing near the door, seemed the most impacted by the revelation. Dorothy kept her gaze fixed on her hands resting on the table, the humility that had always characterized her still present, despite the extraordinary circumstance in which she found herself. "Allow me to illustrate with just one example," Harold continued, gesturing for his lawyer to open a specific folder. "In 2018, Dorothy noticed suspicious behavior from a high-level executive during preparations for an important merger. Her observations, seemingly insignificant to anyone else, phone calls at unusual hours, documents quickly hidden when someone approached, led to a discreet investigation that revealed insider information being leaked to competitors. The timely intervention prevented estimated losses in the tens of millions." "But that's unbelievable," muttered one of the younger directors, looking at Dorothy with new respect. "All this time we thought she was just a coffee lady, an elderly woman who served coffee," Harold completed with a sad smile. "And isn't exactly this type of thinking that demonstrates the fundamental problem? You've grown accustomed to seeing only functions, not people, positions, not stories, costs, not values." The lawyer distributed documents to those present, keeping a main copy which he ceremoniously placed in front of Harold. The businessman breathed deeply before continuing, visibly conserving energy for what would come next. Michael finally took a seat at the table, far from the head, his expression oscillating between indignation and growing understanding. "The document in your hands is a modification to the company's bylaws, duly registered last night. I've created a new directorship, Human Resources and Employee Well-being, with veto power over any decision affecting our employees, regardless of hierarchical level," announced Harold, his voice growing in firmness. "And I appoint, from today, Dorothy as director of this department." The room exploded in surprised murmurs and restrained exclamations. Michael rose abruptly, his face red with indignation, unable to contain himself in the face of what he considered an affront to his newly acquired authority. "This is completely absurd. A coffee lady without higher education, without managerial experience, taking over a directorship," he protested vehemently, pounding his hand on the table. "Father, this is an emotional decision that compromises the entire credibility of the company." "Silence!" Harold's voice thundered, surprisingly powerful for someone in his physical condition. "Dorothy possesses what no diploma can teach: integrity, loyalty, and a profound understanding of what truly sustains a company. Its people. She knows every employee by name, their stories, their difficulties, their aspirations. How many of you with your expensive MBAs and specializations can say the same?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any response. Harold gestured to Dorothy, encouraging her to speak. With visible initial nervousness but growing confidence, she straightened in her chair and addressed those present with a dignity that commanded immediate attention. "I never sought positions of prominence or power," she began, her voice soft but firm. "For 30 years I've watched this company grow, seen people arrive full of dreams and others leave, some fulfilled, others disillusioned. I've learned that an organization is not made of walls or machines, but of hearts beating in synchrony for a common purpose. I accept this responsibility not as a privilege, but as a commitment to ensure that every person who works here is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The simplicity and sincerity of her words seemed to touch even the most skeptical in the room. Harold watched with evident pride, while Michael remained in stunned silence, unable to contest the authenticity of that impromptu but deeply felt speech. "As for you, son," Harold turned to Michael, his tone now combining paternal firmness with business authority, "you now face a crucial choice. You can accept this new reality, learn from it and grow as a leader and as a human being, starting by understanding the value of each role in this company, including serving coffee at the next meetings, as Dorothy did for decades with dignity and excellence. Or you can refuse to accept, and in that case I will be forced to disinherit you and permanently remove you from any position in the company I built." The ultimatum hung heavily in the air. The directors observed the scene with the tension of those witnessing the climax of both a family and business drama simultaneously. Michael, for the first time since he had assumed the presidency, seemed genuinely at a loss for words, confronted not only with the possible loss of his position and inheritance, but with a profound reassessment of his values and actions. "The choice is yours, son, but know that this is not a negotiation," Harold concluded, his tone softening slightly. "It's an opportunity for redemption." After moments that seemed like an eternity, Michael slowly unbuttoned his impeccable jacket, carefully rolled up the sleeves of his linen shirt, and, to the astonishment of everyone present, headed to the small pantry adjacent to the meeting room. He returned minutes later carrying a tray with coffee cups, which he began to serve methodically, starting with Dorothy, in a symbolic gesture that went unnoticed by no one. "I believe Director Dorothy prefers coffee with a touch of cinnamon, if I'm not mistaken," he said with forced humility, but one that represented the beginning of something new. "I apologize if it's not up to the standard of service you've provided for so many years." "It's perfect, Michael," Dorothy replied with an understanding smile. "And remember, it's not about the coffee. It never was. It's about the respect with which we serve one another, regardless of the position we hold." Harold watched the scene with evident emotion, his face reflecting both relief and hope. With a gesture, he asked for everyone's attention again for what would be the closing of that extraordinary meeting. "Before we conclude, I would like our new director to share her first official proposal," he announced, making an encouraging gesture toward Dorothy. With growing confidence, Dorothy presented her vision for a comprehensive healthcare program for employees and their families. She explained how her own experience with her granddaughter's illness and the resulting financial difficulties had made her deeply understand the importance of this support. The plan, surprisingly well structured for someone without formal management training, included partnerships with hospitals, discounts on medications, and personalized follow-up for special cases. No employee of this company should have to choose between working or properly caring for their family's health, she concluded, with the wisdom of someone who personally experienced this dilemma. This is not just a matter of benefits. It's about valuing what really matters, the well-being of the people who make this company function every day. The approval was unanimous, including verbal support from Michael, who seemed to begin to see a business perspective he had never considered before. Months later, Dorothy was organizing documents in her new office, a simple but elegant space with a functional desk and a small area to receive employees who wanted to share concerns or suggestions. Photos of her granddaughter, now healthy thanks to the proper treatment provided by the company's new health program, adorned a corner of the desk. A knock on the door interrupted her concentration. "Hey, excuse me, Dorothy, I brought coffee," announced Michael, entering with a tray. It was no longer a gesture of forced humiliation, but a ritual that had been established between them, a daily moment of sincere conversation and mutual learning. "Thank you, Michael. Please sit down," she invited, pushing the papers aside. "How was your visit to the production sector today?" Revealing. I had never really talked to the machine operators before. "Their ideas for improving efficiency are surprisingly practical," he replied, with the humility of someone discovering a new world within his own company. "One of them, Paul, has worked here for 20 years and suggested a modification to the inventory organization system that could save hours per week." Amazing how we never paid attention to these voices. It's because some voices can only be heard when we truly make ourselves available to listen, commented Dorothy, arranging some papers on her desk. "Your father was always an excellent listener. I remember how he would spend hours on the factory floor, talking to everyone, writing down suggestions in his small blue notebook." "Seos, the blue notebook. I remembered it from when I was a child. I thought they were just business notes," said Michael, with the surprise of someone discovering a new facet of someone they thought they knew completely. "By the way, how is your granddaughter? Is the treatment progressing well?" "Wonderfully. The doctors say she can reduce her medication next month," Dorothy replied, with the radiant smile of a proud grandmother. She took a recent photograph of the girl and showed it to Michael. "Yesterday, she managed to run in the park for almost an hour without getting tired. Before the new treatment, this would have been impossible. That's really incredible. And to think that our healthcare assistance program has already benefited more than 50 families in just 3 months," commented Michael, genuinely moved. "The productivity reports also show improvements. People work better when they're not worried about family health problems. You know, Michael, your father always said that a truly successful company is one where everyone grows together, not just in financial results, but as human beings. He'll be happy when he hears about the community lunch you organized to celebrate the month's birthdays." Michael nodded thoughtfully, observing through the window the movement of the company that he now saw with completely different eyes. At the corner of the parking lot, he could see his father, now recovered and walking with the support of a cane, chatting animatedly with a group of new employees. The lesson had been hard but effective. In his quest for efficiency and modernization, he had almost destroyed the true foundation of that business, the spirit of community and mutual respect, carefully cultivated by his father over decades. "Dorothy, I never imagined saying this, but thank you," he finally said with genuine sincerity in his voice, "for not holding grudges, for teaching me what no business school could teach. My MBA cost a fortune, but the real education happened here, when I lost everything I thought was important and discovered what really matters." "Life has interesting ways of putting us exactly where we need to be," she replied, with the serene wisdom of those who have lived enough to understand the cycles of falls and redemptions, even if sometimes the path seems to begin with a spilled cup of coffee. Did you enjoy Dorothy and Harold's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.